The metallic clang of hammer against rusted anvil echoed through a city that shows no mercy. In South Philadelphia, where life hits as hard as scorching asphalt in mid-July, Mike Johnson fought to keep the only thing that still gave him purpose, his auto repair shop. He was 48 years old, hands weathered by oil and time, and a back that creaked like an old Chevy every time he bent down. The shop, that sanctuary of steel and grease, he'd inherited from his father. Old Henry Johnson, a legend among neighborhood mechanics, had taught him since he was 8 years old to listen to cars as if they had souls. But that day, the shop's soul was dying out. The walls were peeling, covered with old calendars and oil stains like war tattoos. The compressor failed more than it worked, the hydraulic jack had an impossible-to-fix leak, and the phone only rang to remind him of the same thing. You have a past-due balance. We'll proceed with repossession in 48 hours. Mike hung up without a word. He didn't even bother cursing at the bank people anymore. His wife, Sarah, had left that morning for her mother's house. She left him a note, written in firm but sad handwriting. It's not about you, it's about Tommy. He needs stability, not anxiety, every single day. Mike didn't cry. He just stared at the paper for a long while as the cigarette burned down between his fingers. Tommy, his 14-year-old son, barely talked to him anymore. The kid stayed glued to his phone, locked in his world of earbuds and video games. Every attempt at conversation ended in one-word answers or closed doors. Outside, the sky was clouding over, as if it too sensed the collapse coming. Mike sat down in an old plastic chair that creaked under his weight. He surveyed the shop with resignation. Everything in there had a story. The bent wrench his dad used as a pry bar, the first aid kit hanging next to the picture of Jesus, the black and white photos of street races from the 80s. He thought about selling what little he had left. Maybe he could get something for the welder, the snap-on toolbox he took such care of, but he knew that even scraping together every bolt wouldn't stop the bank. It was 5:37 in the afternoon when he heard the sound. A soft purr, elegant, impossible, the kind of engine that shouldn't be on these streets. Mike stood up slowly and walked outside. There, parked in front of the shop, was a black Rolls-Royce Phantom, immaculate, gleaming like polished obsidian under the grey sky. The plates were European. The contrast was so absurd that for a second he thought it was a hallucination. From the back seat emerged a tall man in a light grey suit, fedora, and carved wooden cane. He had the bearing of an old-time movie star and eyes that didn't ask permission to look. "Mike Johnson?" he asked, his voice measured and deep. Mike nodded, not moving closer. "I've heard about you in Detroit, and in Germany, and in Japan, believe it or not." Mike frowned, crossing his arms. "Who are you?" "Ernest Palmer, industrialist, exporter, businessman. But today, I'm just a desperate customer." An uncomfortable silence fell. Ernest gestured toward the car with his head. "This car has been through the best hands on the planet. It's had an intermittent electrical fault for 3 years. Nobody's been able to fix it. Not the factory guys. Not the certified engineers. I've spent over 300,000 euros on failed attempts." Mike raised an eyebrow. "And you think I think you're not like them, that's what they say." "Johnson listens to engines," they told me. "Doesn't need a computer. Has the soul of a real mechanic." I came to find out for myself. Ernest walked to the vehicle and opened the passenger door. The interior smelled of expensive leather and freshly varnished wood. "I'll give you 24 hours. If you find and fix the problem, I'll pay you, well, whatever you think is fair. If you can't fix it, I take the car and there's no deal. Deal?" Mike hesitated. Logic told him it was a trap, a waste of time, but the man's expression wasn't mocking or arrogant. It was pure desperation, and he had nothing left to lose. "I need proper tools. You can't fix this with zip ties. I'll leave you what you need. I've got my people outside with a complete kit. Just one more thing." Ernest stepped closer and lowered his voice. "Don't look for the obvious. This car has secrets." Without waiting for a response, he pulled out a silver business card, left it on the counter, and walked away as if he'd just closed a deal on Wall Street. Mike was left alone with the Rolls-Royce and a pile of questions. He walked around the car, feeling his hands tremble. He'd never had anything this luxurious in front of him. It was like touching a piece of another world. He opened the hood. Silence, luxury, precision, a labyrinth of wires and sensors that looked more like a spaceship than a car. "What the hell am I doing?" he muttered. In the distance, he saw Tommy watching from the corner of the shop, curious. Mike thought about calling him over, but held back. First, he had to tame this black beast with a ghost soul. He turned on the shop lights, grabbed a notebook, took a deep breath, and started to listen. Time in a shop is measured differently, not by clocks, but by sounds. The tap of a wrench, the hum of a compressor, the subtle click of a relay. Mike Johnson knew it by heart, but that night, everything sounded strange. It was 8:15 when he started working on the Rolls-Royce. He closed the shop's metal shutter, locked it from the inside, and asked not to be interrupted. He didn't use the digital scanner that one of Mr. Ernest's assistants offered him. He rejected it with a curt gesture. "I don't read codes. I read vibrations," he said. With a headlamp on, he crawled under the dashboard like a surgeon without a scalpel. The wires were organized with surgical precision, but something didn't add up. The car had no obvious symptoms. It just shut down completely without warning. Then, as if nothing happened, it came back to life. Mike caressed the connectors with his fingers. He wasn't looking for brakes. He was looking for vibrations that shouldn't be there. He took a deep breath. He knew what he was facing wasn't just any fault, it was a mystery. He moved forward calmly. He wasn't a man in a hurry. He checked fuses, relays, control units, main wiring. He'd learned from his father that sometimes problems aren't seen, they're felt, like tremors before an earthquake. Outside, rain was starting to fall hard. Thunder rumbled like a reminder that time was running out. Around 11:40, Mike had his first shock. The car, for no apparent reason, shut down completely. No lights, no dashboard, no electrical system, nothing. What the hell? He tried to open the driver's door. It was locked. He checked the fuses again. All good. Checked the comfort module, the rear wiring, nothing. Suddenly, the car turned on by itself, as if mocking him. Mike stepped back, bewildered. For the first time in his life, he felt afraid of a car. He sat on a metal bench and lit a cigarette with trembling hands. The smoke helped him think. The shop in shadows looked more like an abandoned church than a workplace. He remembered something his father used to say when a fault resisted. "If the car's hiding, it's because you're looking in the wrong places." So Mike stopped looking with his eyes. He started closing his eyelids, touching the wiring with his knuckles, as if the car could speak to him through his skin. That's how, in a corner of the engine compartment, he noticed something odd. A slight tingling when he touched a connector, one of the main ones. It wasn't loose, it wasn't broken, but the plastic housing barely rubbed against part of the chassis, and that contact wasn't constant. One bump was enough to generate a minimal short circuit. No scanner in the world would detect that. "So you're the ghost," he muttered. He turned unintentionally and was surprised to see a shadow moving at the back of the shop. He blinked. It was Tommy, his son, standing in the doorway, watching him with wide eyes. "What are you doing here?" Mike asked, not raising his voice. "I saw the light on, just checking. And then?" "Nothing. Just wanted to see if everything's okay." Mike didn't know what to say. Tommy never showed interest in the shop, and there he was, standing wet from the rain, staring at the Rolls-Royce like it was a spaceship. "You want to come in?" Mike offered, lowering his guard. The kid hesitated, then walked slowly until he was beside him. He observed the car's interior, fascinated. "How much does that car cost?" "More than this whole block," Mike answered with half a smile. Tommy crouched down next to him, curious. Mike went back to the connector and showed him the detail. "Look at this. Looks fine, right? But if you move it just a little, see that spark?" "Yeah, barely noticeable." "That's enough to shut down the whole system, like the car dying for a second." "And how do you fix it?" Mike pulled out a small file, heat-shrink tubing, resin, and an adjustable clamp he'd modified himself. "With patience, and with respect." Tommy watched, attentive. For the first time, he seemed to understand what his father did. He didn't just fix cars, he listened to secrets. Mike cleaned the connector, isolated the problem area, trimmed the plastic causing friction, then used the resin to fix it in an exact position. Then he applied heat with an air gun to seal it with the tubing. Everything had to be perfect, because one wrong move could restart the problem. When he finished, he breathed deeply. It was 3:17 in the morning. Tommy had already fallen asleep in a corner of the shop, on a foam rubber sack. Mike covered him with an old jacket, stroked his hair without him noticing, and returned to the car. He turned the key. The car started. Lights, dashboard, surround sound. Everything was in place. He left it running for half an hour, then turned it off and started it again. He shook it, simulated bumps, jolts, everything. The Phantom didn't shut down again. Mike sat in a chair and looked at the ceiling. He smiled. He allowed himself a sigh of relief. The beast had been tamed, and for the first time in a long time he didn't feel alone. The sun hadn't fully risen when Mike finished sweeping the shop. The Rolls-Royce Phantom sat in the center, like a black jewel under the dim morning light. The air smelled of burnt resin, old coffee, and contained hope. Mike hadn't slept more than an hour. Tommy had left early for his grandmother's house before Sarah woke up. Mike said nothing. There was too much to process. The shop, and for the first time in years, was quiet, but not with that silence of defeat. It was a silence that weighed like the calm before a verdict. At 9:14, a black SUV parked in front of the gate. Two burly men in suits descended, wearing dark glasses and discreet earpieces. Mike frowned, wiped his hands on a rag full of dried grease, and prepared for whatever came next. The Phantom was ready. Mr. Ernest Palmer descended with the same elegance as the night before, but with a different energy. He wore a light grey wool coat and a sharp gaze. "Well?" he asked without preamble. Mike opened the hood calmly. He explained the problem briefly, in simple but firm language. Ernest didn't interrupt. He listened in silence, lips pressed and eyebrows slightly raised. Then he got in the car. He started the engine. Let it run. Lights, dashboard, electrical system, everything in order. "How long has it been running without shutting down?" "Since 3:20 in the morning." Ernest slowly turned his head toward him. "And you're sure it won't fail again?" Mike shrugged. "As sure as you can be when you listen instead of scan. I made a permanent fix, but if it fails again, let's bring it back to me." Ernest nodded. Then he put the car in drive, took a lap around the block, another one, went out to the avenue. 10-15 minutes passed. Mike didn't move. He waited silently, cleaning a spark plug that didn't need cleaning. Finally, the Phantom returned. Ernest got out with a contained smile, as if he didn't know whether to laugh or stay in shock. It worked. Mike didn't respond. It didn't just work. Ernest lifted the keys and shook them gently. "It's perfect." Mike nodded and headed to the small desk at the back of the shop. He pulled out a crumpled sheet from a notebook and wrote something in black ink. He walked back and handed it to the businessman. "Here you go." Ernest took it, read aloud. "Service for electrical diagnosis and repair. $500. He frowned. Thought it was a joke. "Are you sure? Aren't you missing some zeros?" "I'm sure. What I did isn't charged by time, but by what it was worth to you." Ernest looked at him with a mixture of bewilderment, respect, and distrust. He put the paper away, pulled out his black leather wallet, counted the exact bills, handed them to Mike with both hands. "Nobody's ever charged me so little for so much." "I don't like taking advantage of other people's misfortune," Mike answered, his gaze firm. The two stood in silence. Finally, Mr. Ernest took a step forward, as if about to say something, but he stopped, turned around, walked toward his car. Then, just when Mike thought he'd leave without another word, Ernest stopped, turned back, walked back, his cane tapping softly on the pavement. "Something occurs to me, but I need you to hear me out without prejudice." Mike watched him warily. "This shop has soul. You have something money can't buy. I have, well, too much of the other. I want to invest here. Buy new tools, renovate the space, settle your debts with the bank. But I don't want to be your boss, I want to be your partner. You'd still be in charge, as master mechanic, and together, we could turn this place into a training center for young technicians, people like you who don't have anywhere to learn what school doesn't teach." Mike didn't know what to say. Silence fell again like a damp sheet. "What do you say?" Ernest asked. Mike looked at him, then looked at the shop, the peeling walls, the workbench in pieces, the photo of his father hanging next to an old 2005 almanac. "I don't know. You're catching me off guard. I'm from a different school, a different pace." "That's exactly why I need you." Mike hesitated. He thought about his father, about everything he taught him. He thought about his pride, the years of struggle, every bolt placed by hand. He thought about everything he'd lose if he accepted, but also about what he couldn't sustain alone anymore. "I need to talk to my wife about it." Ernest nodded without pressure. "Take the day. Tomorrow I'll bring you the contract. You don't need lawyers. If you don't like it, we'll tear it up right there. But I want to do this right. For you, for what you represent." And without further ado, he got in the Phantom and left. That night, Sarah came home. Tommy told her what he'd seen, excited. He talked about the Rolls-Royce, the ghost, how his dad fixed it like he had superpowers. Mike didn't say much during dinner, just ate in silence. Then, when Tommy went to bed, he sat next to Sarah in the living room. "They offered to save the shop," he said, without beating around the bush, "but in exchange for accepting help." She looked at him for a long time. "And that's bad?" "I don't know if it's giving up." "Giving up? After holding that shop together alone for so many years? Sometimes moving forward is also brave, Mike." Mike lowered his head. Sarah took his hand. "Do it for yourself." "But also for him," she said, pointing to the room where Tommy slept. "That shop can give you more than debt. It can give you a future." Mike didn't respond, just squeezed her hand tight. The next morning, Mr. Ernest arrived on time. He brought a leather folder, hot coffee, and the same serene smile. Mike was already waiting for him, with the shop door open and his cap on straight. "So?" Mike took the folder, gave it a quick look, then with a black pen signed at the bottom of the page. "Let's do it." Ernest shook his hand. "You just changed your life, Mike." Mike took a deep breath. For the first time in a long time, he felt like the future wasn't crushing him. It was waiting for him. The gate is electric now. It opens with a soft hum every morning, letting in the dawn light and the bustle of a new generation. The gleaming sign says, "Johnson Automotive Technical Center," but underneath, in smaller letters, it reads, "Founded in 1982 by Henry Johnson. Renewed with honor in 2023. Mike arrives at 7:05, like always. His blue shop coat is still the same one from years ago, with patches on the elbows and stains that are now part of the uniform. Despite the new technology, the automatic lifts and the latest generation diagnostic scanners, he still carries his metal toolbox, the one he inherited from his dad. The young guys greet him with respect. There are 15 of them, between 16 and 21 years old, all on scholarship, all with similar stories: poverty, abandonment, broken dreams. But here, in this shop, they found more than technical training. They found direction. "Good morning, Mr. Mike," says one, adjusting his coveralls. "Morning, boys. Today we're going to talk about carburetors. Yeah, I know new cars don't even use them anymore, but if you learn that, you understand everything else." Laughter mixes with the sound of the compressor starting up. The workday begins. In a corner of the shop next to bay number 3 is Tommy. He's 16 now. Lean, serious, with long hands like his grandfather's, and an expression of concentration that never leaves his face. He wears the same coveralls as the others, but carries it with his own touch, a red band on his left wrist. Mike watches him from the corner of his eye without saying much. He doesn't need to. Tommy works as if the car speaks to him, just like his father did, just like his grandfather did. He wasn't forced to learn. He was the one who asked to stay after hours, who started asking questions, taking notes, trying. Mr. Ernest doesn't show up as often anymore. He sends financial support, advisors, parts from Germany or Japan, but stays in the background. Once a month he has coffee with Mike in the new office, but always says the same thing. "This place is yours. I just pushed the door open." Mike is grateful, but knows nothing would have been possible without that unexpected visit 2 years ago. Sometimes, in silence, he wonders what would have happened if he'd said no. If his pride had stopped him, if he'd charged more, if he hadn't fixed that connector. Those kinds of thoughts cross his mind more often now, when the kids ask questions he himself was asking 30 years ago. "Mr. Mike, how do you know when the problem isn't what it seems? When you've tried everything, it's time to listen. Cars talk, you just got to know their language." Today, however, is a special day. Tommy has asked to check a car alone, without help, an old Nissan Sentra that one of the students brought in for practice. It has an electrical fault, nothing serious, but enough to test his intuition. Mike watches from a distance, hidden behind a column. He sees how his son checks the dashboard, how he moves the connectors without rushing, how instead of pulling out the scanner, he closes his eyes and touches the parts, just like his grandfather taught him, even though he never met him. "Look for the one that vibrates different, kid," Mike murmurs to himself. Tommy stops his hand, smiles slightly. Then he releases the distributor's main connector, cleans it, adjusts it precisely and secures it with a small clamp he pulled from his personal toolbox. He turns the key. The Sentra starts. No applause, no showing off, just a discreet smile, exactly like his dad's. Mike walks toward him, looks at him seriously. "Who taught you that?" Tommy shrugs. "I read it in an old notebook that was stored at the back of the shop. I think it was my grandfather's." Mike feels a lump in his throat. He nods. "Good solution. Precise, not overdone. Does that mean I did it right?" Mike puts a firm hand on his shoulder. "That means you're starting to understand." The rest of the day passes with laughter, grease, and running engines. At dusk, Mike closes the shop, as always, but before turning off the light, he stops in front of the back wall. There, lovingly framed, is his father's photo, next to an old Champion Spark Plugs poster. "Thanks, Pops. I get it now. It wasn't just about fixing cars." He walks out to the yard where Tommy waits for him to walk home together. As the sun disappears behind the low buildings of South Philly, father and son walk in silence, smelling of oil on their clothes and hearts full. Because now, at Johnson's shop, they don't just tighten bolts, they build futures.